They say that grief brings families together, that loss reveals the true depth of love and support that exists between people who care about each other. They say that in our darkest moments, we discover who really stands beside us, who offers comfort when comfort is needed most desperately. For 42 years of marriage, I believed those words completely. I thought I understood what family meant, what loyalty looked like, what support felt like when life became unbearably difficult. My name is Victoria, I'm 58 years old, and I thought I knew who would be there for me when I needed them most. I was wrong about some people, but I was also wrong about being alone. The story really begins 3 years ago, when my husband Charles was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Charles had been my partner, my best friend, my anchor in this world for 4 decades. We'd built a beautiful life together, raised our daughter Amanda, weathered every storm that marriage brings, and looked forward to growing old together in the house we'd shared for 30 years. When the doctor delivered Charles's diagnosis with that careful, professional tone that medical professionals use to deliver devastating news, I felt like the foundation of my entire existence had cracked beneath my feet. Pancreatic cancer is cruel and swift, giving families very little time to process what's happening before everything changes forever. Charles went from being a vital, active man in his 60s to someone who needed increasing levels of care and support with frightening speed. The treatment options were limited and painful, the prognosis was grim, and we were forced to confront the reality that we would not have the long, peaceful retirement we'd planned and saved for together. But what made Charles's illness even more difficult was the way our daughter Amanda reacted to her father's diagnosis and declining health. I had expected Amanda to be devastated, to want to spend as much time as possible with Charles, to offer whatever support and comfort she could during this terrible time. Instead, Amanda seemed angry and resentful about the demands that her father's illness placed on everyone around him. Amanda was 34 years old, married to a successful attorney named Marcus, and living what appeared to be a perfectly comfortable life in an expensive suburb about an hour from our home. She had 2 children, ages 8 and 10, and had built her adult life around a carefully structured routine of school events, social commitments, and leisure activities that kept her constantly busy and perpetually stressed about maintaining her lifestyle and social position. Charles's cancer diagnosis disrupted Amanda's routine in ways she found intolerable. She complained about having to visit him in the hospital, about rearranging her social schedule to accommodate family medical appointments, about the emotional toll of watching her father deteriorate. When I asked her to help with some of Charles's care needs, she responded with irritation and lectures about how I needed to hire professional help rather than expecting family members to sacrifice their own lives and commitments. Most painfully, Amanda seemed to view Charles's illness as an inconvenience that was interfering with her own plans and priorities. She would visit briefly, become visibly uncomfortable around the medical equipment and medication schedules that dominated our daily routine, and leave as quickly as possible with excuses about other commitments she needed to attend to. When Charles needed someone to drive him to treatment appointments, Amanda was usually unavailable. When he wanted company during long, difficult days of recovery from chemotherapy, she was typically busy with her children's activities or social obligations. The contrast between Amanda's response to her father's illness and my own became a source of tension and resentment that poisoned our family dynamics during an already heartbreaking time. While I was restructuring my entire life around Charles's care needs, taking leave from my job to be with him full-time, learning about medications and treatment schedules and dietary restrictions, Amanda was maintaining her normal routine and expecting everyone else to work around her availability and convenience. But what hurt me most was the way Amanda seemed to resent the attention and care I was giving to Charles, as if my devotion to her father during his final illness was somehow taking something away from her. She made comments about how I'd always been too focused on Charles, too willing to sacrifice my own interests for his comfort, too dependent on our marriage for my sense of identity and purpose. "Mom, you need to think about your own future," Amanda would say during her brief visits. "Dad is sick, and that's terrible, but you can't just stop living your own life to take care of him. You need to maintain some independence and think about what you're going to do when he's gone." The suggestion that I should be planning for Charles's death, rather than focusing on his care, felt like a betrayal of everything I believed about marriage and commitment. Amanda seemed to think that preparing for widowhood while Charles was still alive was practical and healthy, while I saw it as giving up on him before his fight was over. As Charles's condition worsened and it became clear that his time was limited, Amanda's visits became even less frequent and more strained. She would arrive with her children, stay for an hour or two, and leave with visible relief to return to her normal life. She rarely called to check on Charles between visits, never offered to help with his care needs, and seemed to view our daily struggles with his illness as problems we'd chosen to create for ourselves. The most revealing conversation we had during Charles's illness came 6 months before he died, when Amanda suggested that we should consider moving Charles to a hospice facility rather than continuing to care for him at home. She said it would be better for everyone, that professional caregivers could provide better medical support than I could manage, and that I needed to accept that Charles's condition was beyond what family members should be expected to handle. "Mom, you're killing yourself trying to take care of Dad," Amanda said. "You look exhausted, you've gained weight, you never leave the house anymore. This isn't healthy for you, and it's not necessarily what's best for Dad either. Professional facilities have resources and expertise that you don't have." But what Amanda didn't understand was that caring for Charles during his final months wasn't a burden I was struggling to bear. It was a privilege I was grateful to have. After 42 years of marriage, I couldn't imagine allowing strangers to provide the intimate, personal care that Charles needed during his most vulnerable time. I wanted to be the one holding his hand during difficult nights, managing his medications, helping him stay comfortable and dignified as his body failed. Amanda's suggestion that Charles would receive better care from professionals revealed how little she understood about the kind of support that matters most during terminal illness. Charles didn't need more medical expertise, he needed love and familiarity and the comfort of being surrounded by people who had shared his life for decades. He needed to know that he wasn't alone, that his suffering mattered to someone, that his death would be grieved by people who truly understood what the world was losing when he died. During Charles's final weeks, as it became clear that death was approaching quickly, Amanda's behavior became even more problematic. She started making comments about practical matters that needed to be addressed, about financial arrangements that would need to be handled, about decisions I would need to make about the house and my future living situation. She seemed more concerned about the logistics of Charles's death than about the emotional reality of losing him. "Mom, have you thought about whether you want to stay in the house after Dad dies?" Amanda asked during one of her last visits with Charles. "It's a big place for one person, and it's going to be expensive to maintain on your own. Maybe this would be a good time to think about downsizing to something more manageable." The fact that Amanda was discussing my post-widowhood housing arrangements while Charles was still alive and within earshot felt like a fundamental violation of respect and sensitivity. She was treating his approaching death as a practical problem to be solved rather than a devastating loss to be grieved. Charles died on a Tuesday morning in October, at home in our bedroom, with me holding his hand and telling him how much I loved him. His passing was peaceful and dignified, exactly what we had hoped for during the long months of his illness. In that moment of profound loss and grief, I felt grateful that I had been able to care for him personally, that his final weeks had been spent surrounded by love rather than institutional efficiency. Amanda's reaction to her father's death was immediate and focused on arrangements rather than grief. Within hours of Charles's passing, she was making phone calls about funeral homes and memorial services, discussing guest lists and catering options, and organizing logistics with the same energy and efficiency she brought to planning her children's birthday parties. But what became clear during the funeral planning process was that Amanda had very different ideas about how Charles should be remembered and who should be central to his memorial service. She wanted a large, formal service that would showcase the family's social connections and demonstrate the successful life Charles had built. She was more concerned about impressing the attendees than about creating a meaningful tribute to her father's life and character. "Mom, we need to think carefully about the guest list and the format of the service," Amanda said as we sat in the funeral director's office. "Dad knew a lot of important people, and this memorial should reflect the kind of man he was and the kind of life he built. We want people to leave feeling inspired by his achievements and impressed by how well he was loved and respected." Amanda's approach to her father's memorial felt like she was planning a networking event rather than a tribute to someone we'd lost. She was focused on making the right impression on the right people rather than creating a space for genuine grief and remembrance. She seemed to view the funeral as an opportunity to demonstrate the family's social status rather than as a sacred time to honor Charles's memory. The memorial service was held on a Saturday afternoon at the elegant funeral home that Amanda had selected for its impressive facilities and prestigious reputation. She had arranged for elaborate floral displays, professional catering, and a formal program that included speakers from Charles's business associates, community organizations, and social connections. The service was beautiful and dignified, exactly the kind of tribute that Charles would have appreciated. But as the memorial service progressed, I began to notice something troubling about Amanda's behavior and her interactions with the people who had come to pay their respects to Charles. She positioned herself as the primary host of the event, greeting guests and accepting condolences as if she were Charles's widow rather than his daughter. She spoke about her father's life and achievements as if she had been his primary companion and supporter during his final years. Most painfully, Amanda seemed to be subtly minimizing my role in Charles's life and presenting herself as his most important family relationship. When people approached to express their sympathy for my loss, Amanda would quickly join the conversation and redirect attention to her own grief and her own memories of her father. She acted as if she were the person who had been most affected by Charles's death, despite her limited involvement in his care during his illness. The most hurtful moment of the memorial service came during the informal time when guests were sharing memories and expressing condolences. I was standing near the display of photographs that chronicled Charles's life, feeling overwhelmed by the reality of his absence and the finality of this tribute to our 42-year partnership. Several people had approached to tell me how much they'd admired my devotion to Charles during his illness, how beautiful it had been to witness the love and care I'd provided during his final months. Amanda overheard these conversations and seemed irritated by the attention and praise I was receiving for my role as Charles's caregiver and primary support system. When Mrs. Patterson from our church told me that I'd been an inspiration during Charles's illness, that she'd never seen such devoted love between spouses, Amanda interrupted with a sharp comment that changed the entire dynamic of the memorial service. "Well, Mom won't have anyone to take care of now," Amanda said with a bitter laugh that cut through the quiet conversations around us. "I guess she'll have to figure out what to do with herself now that Dad's gone. She's never really had her own life or her own interests, so this is going to be quite an adjustment for her." The comment was cruel and dismissive, but Amanda wasn't finished. As Mrs. Patterson and several other guests looked uncomfortable and tried to change the subject, Amanda continued with observations about my future that felt like public humiliation disguised as concern. "I keep telling Mom that she needs to think practically about her situation," Amanda continued, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "She's 58 years old, she's been out of the workforce for years, and she's never really developed friendships or hobbies outside of her marriage. I mean, let's be honest, she's going to be alone forever now. Who's going to want to deal with a grieving widow who doesn't know how to live independently?" The words hit me like physical blows. Amanda was using my grief as entertainment, my devotion to Charles as evidence of my inadequacy, and my widowhood as proof of my fundamental unlovability. She was telling a room full of people who had come to honor Charles's memory that his widow was pathetic, dependent, and destined to die alone because she'd been too devoted to her husband to develop a life worth living. The conversations around us stopped completely. People stared at Amanda in shock, unable to believe that she would humiliate her own mother at her father's memorial service. Mrs. Patterson looked horrified, and several other guests moved away from our area as if Amanda's cruelty might be contagious. I stood there frozen, too stunned and hurt to respond, feeling like Amanda had just stripped me naked in front of everyone who had come to support us in our grief. But Amanda seemed energized by the attention her cruel words had generated, and she continued her public assessment of my prospects and character flaws. She told our guests that I had never learned to be independent, that I'd been too focused on Charles to develop my own interests or relationships, and that my future looked bleak because I'd failed to prepare for life without him. "I love my mother," Amanda said in a tone that suggested the opposite, "but she's going to have to face reality now. She can't just expect other people to take care of her the way Dad did. She's going to have to learn how to live alone, and frankly, I don't think she has what it takes to build a new life for herself. She'll probably just become one of those bitter old widows who complains about being lonely but never does anything to change her situation." The cruelty was breathtaking, but what made it even worse was that Amanda was delivering this character assassination at Charles's memorial service, in front of people who had come to honor his memory and support his family during our time of loss. She was using the most sacred and vulnerable moment of my life to publicly humiliate me and establish her superior position in our family hierarchy. I felt tears of humiliation and rage burning behind my eyes, but I was too shocked and hurt to find words to defend myself. Amanda had chosen the perfect moment to attack me, when I was already devastated by grief and surrounded by people who expected me to maintain dignity and composure appropriate to a memorial service. She knew I couldn't respond with the anger her cruelty deserved without appearing inappropriate and unstable in front of Charles's friends and colleagues. But as Amanda continued her public assessment of my inadequacies and future loneliness, something happened that neither of us had expected. The front door of the funeral home opened quietly, and someone entered the room with the confident, purposeful stride of a person who belonged there and had every right to be present. It was James Morrison, a distinguished gentleman of 62 who had been Charles's closest friend since college and had remained a constant presence in our lives throughout our marriage. James was a widower himself, having lost his wife Sarah to breast cancer 5 years earlier, and he had been one of the few people who truly understood what Charles and I had been going through during the final months of the illness. But James wasn't just Charles's friend, and he wasn't just another mourner coming to pay his respects. James was the man I had fallen in love with during the darkest period of my life, the person who had provided emotional support and companionship when I felt most alone and overwhelmed by the demands of caring for Charles during his terminal illness. The relationship between James and me had developed slowly and carefully over the 18 months of Charles's illness. James had been visiting regularly, ostensibly to spend time with Charles and provide the kind of male companionship that Charles needed during his difficult treatment and recovery periods. But as Charles's condition worsened and he spent more time sleeping or resting, James and I had found ourselves talking quietly in the kitchen while Charles napped, sharing the kind of deep, honest conversations that develop between people who are watching someone they love die slowly and painfully. James understood my situation in ways that no one else could, because he had cared for Sarah through her own terminal illness and knew the exhaustion, isolation, and grief that comes with watching your life partner fade away despite your best efforts to save them. He knew about the guilt that comes with taking care of yourself when someone you love is dying, the loneliness that develops even when you're never physically alone, the way that terminal illness changes every aspect of daily life and relationships. More importantly, James had been there for me in ways that Amanda never was and never could be. When I needed someone to drive Charles to medical appointments, James was available. When I needed a few hours away from the house to run errands or just breathe normally, James would come sit with Charles so I could have some time to myself. When I felt overwhelmed by the medical decisions and treatment options we were facing, James would research information and help me understand our choices. As Charles's illness progressed and it became clear that death was approaching, James and I had developed feelings for each other that went beyond friendship and mutual support. We both felt guilty about the timing and the circumstances, but we couldn't deny the emotional connection that had grown between us during those difficult months of caring for our dying spouses. We had never acted inappropriately while Charles was alive. Our relationship had been built on conversations, emotional support, and the kind of deep understanding that develops between people who are facing similar challenges. But we both knew that when the acute phase of grief was over, when the practical matters of widowhood were settled, we wanted to explore the possibility of building a life together based on the love and respect that had developed between us. Charles had known about my friendship with James, had encouraged it, and had even expressed hope that James and I would continue to support each other after his death. Charles understood that I would need companionship and love in my life after he was gone, and he trusted James to treat me with the respect and devotion that I deserved. But I had never told Amanda about the depth of my relationship with James, partly because I knew she would disapprove and partly because I wanted to protect something beautiful and meaningful from her criticism and interference. Amanda had demonstrated throughout Charles's illness that she was more concerned with appearances and social judgments than with emotional authenticity and genuine support. Now, as James entered the funeral home and moved purposefully through the crowd of mourners toward where I stood enduring Amanda's public humiliation, I realized that our private relationship was about to become very public indeed. James had heard Amanda's cruel assessment of my future loneliness, and his expression made it clear that he wasn't going to allow her words to go unanswered. James approached our group with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it. He ignored Amanda completely and came directly to me, placing a protective hand on my shoulder and looking into my eyes with the kind of love and concern that had sustained me through Charles's illness and death. "Victoria," James said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room, "I'm sorry I'm late. I wanted to be here earlier to support you through this difficult day." The words were simple and appropriate, but the intimacy and familiarity in James's tone made it clear to everyone present that this wasn't just a family friend offering casual support. This was a man who cared deeply about my well-being, who felt protective of me during my time of grief, and who had every intention of continuing to be part of my life going forward. Amanda's reaction was immediate and visible. Her face went white with shock as she realized that her public humiliation of me had been witnessed by someone who clearly disagreed with her assessment of my prospects and desirability. Her confident cruelty faltered as she tried to process what James's presence and protective behavior meant for her narrative about my future loneliness. But James wasn't finished making his position clear. As Amanda stared at him in stunned silence, he continued speaking in a voice that carried throughout the room and left no doubt about his intentions or our relationship. "Victoria, I know this is an incredibly difficult time for you," James said, "and I want you to know that you're not alone in this grief. Charles was like a brother to me, and you've become someone I care about deeply. I'll be here to support you through whatever comes next, for as long as you'll have me." The declaration was respectful and appropriate for a memorial service, but it was also unmistakably clear about James's commitment to me and his rejection of Amanda's cruel predictions about my future. He was telling a room full of people that I was loved, valued, and supported by someone who understood my worth and wanted to share my life. Amanda finally found her voice and tried to regain control of the situation that had just slipped completely away from her. "James, how nice of you to come," she said with forced pleasantness that couldn't hide her shock and confusion. "Dad would have appreciated having you here to honor his memory." But James's response made it clear that he hadn't come just to honor Charles's memory, and that he wasn't interested in pretending that Amanda's behavior had been acceptable or that her assessment of my future had been accurate. "I'm here for Victoria," James said simply, his tone making it clear that my well-being was his primary concern. "Charles asked me to look after her, and that's exactly what I intend to do." The room was completely silent now, with dozens of people watching this unexpected drama unfold in the middle of what should have been a solemn memorial service. Amanda's cruel words about my loneliness and undesirability were hanging in the air, directly contradicted by the obvious love and respect that James was showing me in front of everyone present. Mrs. Patterson, who had witnessed Amanda's entire cruel performance, approached us with tears in her eyes and spoke directly to James with gratitude and approval that contrasted sharply with the shock and disapproval she'd shown toward Amanda's behavior. "James, it's so wonderful to see you here supporting Victoria," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Charles would be so grateful to know that she has someone like you in her life during this difficult time. It's exactly what she needs and deserves." Other guests began approaching us to express similar sentiments, and it became clear that Amanda's assessment of my prospects had been not only cruel but completely wrong. The people who knew me, who had observed my devotion to Charles during his illness, who understood my character and values, were delighted to see that I had found love and support with someone who appreciated my worth. Amanda stood frozen as the social dynamics she had tried to manipulate turned completely against her. Instead of establishing herself as the superior family member who understood reality better than her delusional mother, she had revealed herself as someone who would attack a grieving widow at her husband's memorial service. Instead of gaining sympathy and support for her realistic assessment of my future, she had exposed her own cruelty and lack of empathy during one of life's most sacred moments. The rest of the memorial service continued with James beside me, his presence transforming my experience of the day from one of public humiliation and grief to one of support, love, and hope for the future. People approached us as a couple, expressing their happiness that I had found companionship and their approval of James as someone worthy of my love and trust. But the most significant moment came at the end of the service, when the formal program had concluded and people were beginning to leave. Amanda approached James and me with an expression that mixed embarrassment, anger, and desperate calculation, as she tried to figure out how to repair the damage her cruelty had done to her own reputation and family relationships. "James," Amanda said carefully, "I hope you understand that I was just concerned about Mom's adjustment to being alone. I didn't realize that you two had developed such a close friendship during Dad's illness." It was a transparent attempt to reframe her cruel words as concern rather than cruelty, and to minimize our relationship as friendship, rather than acknowledging the love that had been obvious to everyone present. Amanda was trying to save face and regain some control over a situation that had exposed her character in the worst possible way. But James's response made it clear that he had no interest in helping Amanda escape the consequences of her behavior or in pretending that her words had been motivated by concern rather than cruelty. "Amanda," James said quietly but firmly, "your mother is an extraordinary woman who devoted herself completely to caring for your father during the most difficult time of his life. She deserves love, respect, and support, not public humiliation at his memorial service. I'm grateful that Charles asked me to look after her, and I have every intention of doing exactly that." The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable, delivered in front of the remaining mourners who were still close enough to hear James defend me against Amanda's cruelty. He wasn't just correcting Amanda's assessment of my future, he was holding her accountable for her behavior and making it clear that her treatment of me had been inappropriate and hurtful. Amanda's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger as she realized that her attempt to manipulate the situation had failed completely. She had tried to establish herself as the realistic, practical family member who understood harsh truths that I was too naive to accept. Instead, she had revealed herself as someone who would attack a grieving widow at her husband's funeral, and she had been publicly corrected by a man who clearly valued and loved me. The final blow to Amanda's position came when several of Charles's oldest friends approached us before leaving the memorial service. These were people who had known our family for decades, who had watched Amanda grow up, and who had observed her behavior during Charles's illness and at his memorial service. "Victoria," said Robert Chen, who had been Charles's business partner for 25 years, Charles would be so happy to know that you and James have found each other. He worried about leaving you alone, and he would be grateful that someone he trusted is going to take care of you." Similar comments came from other longtime friends, all expressing their approval of our relationship and their happiness that I wouldn't be facing widowhood alone. These were people whose opinions carried weight in our social community, and their unanimous support for James and me represented a complete rejection of Amanda's cruel predictions about my future. As the memorial service ended and people began to leave, James and I stood together receiving the kind of support and blessing that Amanda had predicted I would never receive. Instead of being seen as a pathetic, dependent widow who would die alone, I was being celebrated as a woman who had found love again with a good man who appreciated my worth. Amanda left the memorial service without saying goodbye to either James or me, her embarrassment and anger too overwhelming for her to maintain even basic politeness. She had arrived at her father's funeral expecting to establish her superiority over her grieving mother, and she was leaving having exposed herself as cruel and heartless in front of everyone who mattered in our social community. The months that followed Charles's memorial service brought dramatic changes to our family dynamics and social relationships. James and I began openly acknowledging our relationship, spending time together publicly, and building the kind of life partnership that we had quietly hoped for during the difficult months of Charles's illness. Our relationship was received with warmth and approval by virtually everyone who knew us. Charles's friends and colleagues expressed their happiness that I had found love again with someone they trusted and respected. Church members and neighbors told us how wonderful it was to see two people who had both experienced loss finding comfort and companionship with each other. James and I were invited to social events as a couple, included in gatherings and activities that I had worried I might lose access to as a widow. Instead of becoming a social burden or awkward single person in a couples-oriented community, I found myself part of a partnership that was welcomed and celebrated everywhere we went. But Amanda's reaction to our relationship was bitter and hostile. She seemed unable to accept that her predictions about my future had been completely wrong, that her assessment of my desirability and prospects had been contradicted by reality. Instead of acknowledging that she had been cruel and mistaken, Amanda doubled down on her criticism and found new reasons to disapprove of my choices. Amanda began making comments about the timing of our relationship, suggesting that it was inappropriate for me to be involved with another man so soon after Charles's death. She questioned James's motives and suggested that he might be taking advantage of my grief and vulnerability. She criticized our decision to spend time together publicly, arguing that it showed disrespect for Charles's memory. But most revealingly, Amanda seemed angry that I was happy, that I had found love and companionship rather than experiencing the lonely, pathetic existence she had predicted at Charles's memorial service. My relationship with James represented a fundamental challenge to Amanda's worldview and her assumptions about what I deserved and what I was capable of achieving. The tension came to a head 8 months after Charles's death, when James and I decided to get married. We had both been through the long, difficult process of losing a spouse to terminal illness. We had supported each other through grief and adjustment, and we wanted to formalize our commitment and build a life together based on the love and respect that had developed between us. Amanda's reaction to our engagement announcement was explosive and revealing. She accused me of disrespecting Charles's memory, of moving on too quickly, of making decisions that would embarrass the family and damage Charles's reputation. She said that people would think I had never really loved Charles if I was willing to remarry so soon after his death. But underneath Amanda's moral objections to our engagement was a more practical concern. Our marriage would affect her inheritance expectations and her assumptions about her future role in managing my affairs and decisions. As long as I was alone and potentially vulnerable, Amanda could position herself as my primary support system and eventual caregiver, with all the control and influence that role would provide. My marriage to James would eliminate Amanda's opportunity to manage my life and resources, and would establish James as my primary family relationship and support system. Amanda would lose the position of authority and influence she had expected to inherit when Charles died, and she would have to accept that I had chosen a different path than the lonely, dependent existence she had predicted and perhaps secretly hoped for. The conversation in which Amanda revealed her true concerns about my engagement was illuminating and painful. She began with moral arguments about respecting Charles's memory and taking appropriate time to grieve, but eventually moved on to more practical objections about financial security and family relationships. "Mom, you barely know James," Amanda said during a tense conversation about our wedding plans. "Yes, he was Dad's friend, but you've only been close to him during this terrible time when you weren't thinking clearly. How do you know he's not just taking advantage of your grief and loneliness? How do you know he's not after your money or just looking for someone to take care of him?" The suggestions that James might be exploiting me financially or emotionally revealed how little Amanda understood about our relationship and how poorly she had been paying attention to the dynamics in our family during Charles's illness. James was financially secure, emotionally mature, and had been supporting me rather than taking advantage of me throughout our friendship and relationship. But Amanda's concerns about my financial security were also revealing of her own expectations and assumptions about inheriting control over my resources and decisions. She had apparently assumed that, as Charles's widow, I would become dependent on her guidance and support, giving her significant influence over my finances, living arrangements, and major life choices. "Mom, you need to think practically about this," Amanda continued. "You're not getting any younger, and you have significant assets that need to be protected and managed carefully. Getting married again could complicate your estate planning, affect your social security benefits, and create legal issues about inheritance and property rights. Are you sure James isn't more interested in your house and your financial security than in your emotional well-being?" The irony of Amanda questioning James's motives while simultaneously revealing her own interest in my assets was not lost on me. She was suggesting that James might be after my money, while making it clear that she had been planning to manage my financial affairs herself once Charles was gone. What Amanda didn't understand was that James and I had been completely transparent with each other about our financial situations, our estate planning, and our expectations about marriage in our 60s. We had both been through the experience of losing spouses and managing the practical aspects of widowhood, and we approached our relationship with the kind of mature, realistic perspective that comes from understanding how precious and fragile life partnerships can be. James had his own home, his own retirement savings, his own estate planning arrangements, and his own adult children who would inherit his resources. Our decision to marry was based on love and companionship, not financial advantage or security concerns. We were both financially independent and emotionally mature enough to enter marriage as equal partners rather than as people looking for someone to solve our practical problems. But most importantly, James had proven his character and his commitment to my well-being during the most difficult period of my life. While Amanda had been unavailable and resentful during Charles's illness, James had been present and supportive in every way that mattered. While Amanda had publicly humiliated me at Charles's memorial service, James had defended my dignity and declared his love in front of everyone who mattered in our community. The contrast between Amanda's behavior and James's behavior during the most challenging year of my life made it clear who deserved my trust, my love, and my confidence in making major life decisions. Amanda had proven herself to be selfish, cruel, and unreliable when I needed support most desperately. James had proven himself to be kind, generous, and completely devoted to my happiness and well-being. Our wedding took place 14 months after Charles's death, in the garden behind the house that James and I would share after our marriage. It was a small, intimate ceremony attended by close friends and family members who had supported our relationship from the beginning. Charles's oldest friends were there to celebrate with us. Church members who had watched our friendship develop into love were there to witness our commitment, and neighbors who had observed James's devotion during Charles's illness were there to bless our future together. Amanda chose not to attend our wedding. She sent a brief message saying that she couldn't support a decision that she believed was disrespectful to her father's memory and potentially harmful to my future security. Her absence was noted by everyone present, and her reasons for missing her mother's wedding were seen as petty and selfish by people who had watched James support me through grief and adjustment. But Amanda's absence didn't diminish the joy and celebration of our wedding day. Instead, it highlighted how completely her cruel predictions at Charles's memorial service had been proven wrong. Far from being alone forever, I was surrounded by love and support from a husband who cherished me, friends who celebrated my happiness, and a community that had embraced our relationship from the beginning. The 2 years since James and I married have been filled with the kind of happiness and fulfillment that I had worried I might never experience again after Charles's death. James and I have traveled together, created new traditions and routines in our shared home, and built the kind of partnership that honors both of our previous marriages while creating something entirely new and beautiful. We have also become more involved in our community, volunteering together with organizations that support widows and widowers through the difficult process of adjusting to life after losing a spouse. Our own experience of finding love again after loss has made us effective advocates and counselors for other people facing similar challenges and opportunities. Most significantly, our marriage has given both of us a renewed sense of purpose and joy that we had thought might be lost forever when our first spouses died. Instead of spending our remaining years in loneliness and decline, we are building new memories, sharing new adventures, and supporting each other through whatever challenges aging and time might bring. Amanda's relationship with both of us has remained strained and distant since our wedding. She occasionally sends brief messages on holidays or birthdays, but she has never acknowledged that her predictions about my future were wrong or that her behavior at Charles's memorial service was inappropriate and hurtful. More significantly, Amanda has never apologized for the public humiliation she inflicted on me during one of the most difficult days of my life, or for the cruel and inaccurate assessment she made of my character and prospects in front of people whose opinions mattered to me. Her inability to acknowledge her mistakes or to celebrate my happiness has created a permanent rift in our relationship that may never be fully healed. But I have found peace with Amanda's choices and limitations, just as I have found peace with the grief and loss that brought James and me together. Life is too short and too precious to spend it trying to force people to be better than they are willing to be, or to waste emotional energy on relationships with people who have proven themselves incapable of basic kindness and support during times of crisis. The scholarship fund that James and I established in Charles's memory has now supported 8 young people whose single parents made sacrifices similar to those I made during Charles's illness. Each of these students has written thoughtful letters of gratitude, expressing appreciation for opportunities they understand might not have been possible without the generosity of strangers who understood the value of education and hard work. Reading these letters and meeting these young people at graduation ceremonies and scholarship events has been deeply fulfilling for both James and me. It has given Charles's death additional meaning and purpose, knowing that his memory is being honored through support for deserving young people who will use their education to build meaningful lives and contribute to their communities. The house that James and I share is filled with photographs from both of our previous marriages, mementos that honor the love we shared with Charles and Sarah while celebrating the new life we have built together. We talk about our first spouses regularly, sharing memories and keeping their spirits alive in our daily conversations and routines. But we also create new traditions and memories that are uniquely ours, that reflect the particular kind of love that develops between two people who have both experienced profound loss and found each other in the midst of grief and adjustment. Our relationship is built on gratitude, understanding, and the deep appreciation that comes from knowing how rare and precious true companionship can be. The garden behind our house has become a special place where we honor both the past and the future, with flowers that Charles loved growing beside plants that James and I have chosen together. It's a physical representation of how love doesn't end when someone dies, but expands and includes new relationships and new forms of happiness that honor what came before while embracing what is possible now. On quiet evenings, James and I often sit in that garden talking about our gratitude for the unexpected gift of finding each other, for the opportunity to build a new life together after both of us thought our capacity for deep love and partnership had died with our first spouses. We talk about Charles and Sarah with love and appreciation, but we also make plans for the future and celebrate the daily joys of sharing life with someone who understands both the preciousness and the fragility of human connection. Sometimes I think about Amanda and wonder if she has learned anything from watching her cruel predictions about my future prove to be so completely wrong. I wonder if she has developed any insight into her own behavior at Charles's memorial service, or if she has gained any understanding of what real love and support look like in times of crisis and loss. But mostly, I focus on the life James and I have built together, on the love and respect we share, and on the gratitude we feel for having been given a second chance at happiness and partnership. Amanda's cruelty at Charles's memorial service was devastating at the time, but it also created the circumstances that allowed James to publicly declare his love and commitment to me in front of everyone who mattered. In a strange way, Amanda's attempt to humiliate me became the catalyst for one of the most beautiful moments of my life, when James stepped forward to stand beside me and prove that her assessment of my worth and my future had been completely wrong. Her words were meant to diminish me, but they ultimately provided the opportunity for James to demonstrate the depth of his love and the strength of his commitment to my happiness. The most important lesson I learned from that terrible and wonderful day is that sometimes our greatest humiliations become our most profound vindications, that the people who try to diminish us can inadvertently create opportunities for others to lift us up and celebrate our worth. Amanda's cruelty revealed her own character flaws, but it also allowed James to reveal the beauty and strength of his character in defending someone he loved. I also learned that predictions about the future, especially cruel predictions made in moments of grief and vulnerability, often say more about the person making them than about the person they're directed toward. Amanda's assessment of my prospects revealed her own limited understanding of love, relationship, and the resilience of the human spirit. Her inability to imagine anyone wanting to share life with me said nothing about my worth and everything about her own capacity for empathy and vision. Most importantly, I learned that real love often arrives in unexpected ways, at unexpected times, and in forms that we might never have imagined possible. Charles's death was devastating, but it also created the circumstances that allowed James and me to discover the depth of feeling and compatibility that had been developing between us throughout the difficult months of illness and caregiving. The love James and I share is different from what I had with Charles, but it is no less real, no less meaningful, and no less deserving of celebration and respect. It is the kind of mature, grateful love that develops between people who understand loss, who appreciate the gift of companionship, and who are committed to making the most of whatever time they have been given together. At 60 years old, I am happier and more fulfilled than I have been in decades. I have a husband who loves and respects me, friends who celebrate my happiness, and a community that has embraced our relationship and our commitment to each other. I have found meaning and purpose in honoring Charles's memory while building a new life that would make him proud. Amanda's prediction that I would be alone forever could not have been more wrong. Instead of dying lonely and bitter, I am living surrounded by love, support, and the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from having overcome profound loss to find unexpected joy and partnership in the later chapters of life. The memorial service that began with public humiliation ended with public vindication, and the relationship that Amanda tried to mock and diminish has become the source of my greatest happiness and fulfillment. Sometimes wisdom does strike back, not through revenge or cruelty, but through the simple power of living well and proving that love, kindness, and resilience will always triumph over bitterness and manipulation. If Victoria's story resonated with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age?